Hey guys, what's up? Robert Crumb is a very interesting artist. I think he's a good artist, but the thing about Robert Crumb is he's very original in what he does. He's one of these original artists, and I think that's why he's known so well. It's the artists that are original, that they're new and different, and something the art world hasn't seen that make the difference. These are the artists that become popular. These are the artists that become successful. Whether it's Van Gogh that drew things from his own point of view, or Picasso who kind of like fragmented people's faces and put that together, and no one's ever done that before. Salvador Dali who put all this weird, horses with long legs and like a fly and the melting clocks and things like that. All of these things was different than what was happening at the time, because Van Gogh was happening at the time of all of the Impressionists and stuff like that. But he didn't do Impressionism. He did his own thing, and I think this is what Robert Crumb does, his own thing. But what's amazing about his artwork is that it expresses his point of view. It expresses his outlook, and it shows how he sees things. And how it's not like how he sees things that other people agree on. It's how he sees things that's different from how other people see things, right? Because everyone's going to see things differently. Some people are going to see things like you see things. Other people are going to disagree and see things differently. But there's other people that are going to, agree with the way they see things, And what's interesting about the art of Robert Crumb is it's a different way of looking at stuff. It's an interesting way of seeing things. And, from the women with the big legs and whatever, on all the different weird shapes of people and their faces, and the humor in the art. It's just not just art, it's sequential art. It's comic books, it's humor. He started off doing like Zap comics and making jokes and underground comics and all that kind of stuff. It was amazing because at the time, underground comics was the thing. They were the revolutionaries, right? Because every other comic book company was conforming to the code of comic books, right? You can only print this and you can't print that. You can't print this, can't print that, can't print that. And they were making these comics, but they couldn't do anything with them. Their freedom of speech was basically censored, where Robert Crumb, it's not just freedom of speech that he's expressing, and it is freedom of speech that he's expressing because he is saying things in order to say them, to demonstrate that it's important to say things and show things and express things how you see them and say things the way you want to say them. And it's interesting that it's an American comic because America's very freedom of speech kind of place because it's in the Constitution. It was like one of the first countries in the world that said freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want, because honestly, saying something isn't going to hurt anybody. It really isn't. I mean, obviously, like, saying something that insults someone will hurt them and insult them, but, telling someone you can't say this because I disagree, or you can't say this because I think it's wrong, that is what he's against. And it's not just his way of looking at things, it's the whole thing about looking at things, the whole thing about like him saying, I'm going to see things my own way, I'm going to express things my own way, I'm going to put forth what I think is funny, what I think is good humor, and I don't care if other people get insulted by it because it's what I think, you know what I mean? And what's interesting about that is it doesn't mean that he's out to insult people. It just means that he's saying what he thinks, because somebody else who's gonna say, oh, I like this or I don't like this, they're just saying what they think, and so the whole freedom of speech thing is basically ingrained in his art, and his art is very, very much freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom to say what you want to say, freedom to make jokes in bad taste. It's all about freedom. It's all about I see things this way, and this is what I'm going to express. He's not going to draw something that's like, oh, I'm going to kind of water it down and make it, acceptable so everyone likes it. You know what I mean? And he's not doing that. He's daring to be himself. He's daring to be an individual. He's daring to not conform to society or other people's expectation of what art is supposed to be. It's very, very American. It's very freedom of speech. It's very, very freedom oriented. It's very, very opinionated. It's like, I think this. He's not saying other people can't disagree with him, and he's not saying other people can't have their own opinion about it. He's just saying, this is my opinion. This is what I think. This is what I'm gonna draw, because this is what I think. This is who I am, and this is how I see things, and this is what I'm gonna draw. How he sees women. He draws the women he finds attractive, even though that's not necessarily the mainstream of what magazines and models that basically model clothing, or models that show off clothing, or models who are in like Playboy or whatever it is. It's not necessarily how basically society thinks the standards of beauty are. He's expressing his own standards of beauty, even though they're not necessarily going to agree with the mainstream standard of what's beautiful, because the body types of the women that he draws is not necessarily the body types of what society or the mainstream says is the ideal proportions or the ideal body type of attractive, beautiful women. So that's one thing. Another thing is making jokes in bad taste. And one of the main things is that, like, just flying in the face of anyone that's trying to censor anyone else. He was the warrior that flew in the face of what was happening. They were censoring comic books. You couldn't say this. You couldn't draw this. You couldn't talk about this subject or anything like that. And it's interesting because on the one hand, they're saying, oh, because kids read it. But honestly, like, it's comics is just like a form of communication. Kids read that, but kids read books also, and you're not censoring books. Or kids also watch movies, and you're not censoring movies, right? Kids are, kids are gonna see everything. It's not for kids, and he basically said that, at the time, comic books, they even were not for kids. They were saying, you can't write that. Even though they weren't for kids, even though they were for adults, and adults read those comics. The comics code said, you can't write that, you can't say that, It's sort of like a book burning kind of thing. It's a complete, violation of the freedom of speech that's so valuable in a democracy. It's so valuable because if you can't say what you think, then anyone can pretty much, then who can? You know what I mean? Like, if you can't say what you think, then the only people that can are the people in power, and the people that, that you can't say anything to because you can't challenge their power. They are just in authority, or they're in power, and you can't say anything about it because they're just, you say something and then you don't want to be on their bad side because they're seriously in power. You don't want to do that. So, or they have some kind of influence or something like that. But that, I think, is what his art is about. It says more than it is. It's art, and it's good art, but it goes anywhere from underground comics all the way to illustrating the Bible. And it's interesting that, like, Robert Crumb's illustration of the Bible that starts with Book of Genesis and goes on, I actually thought at first it was going to be funny or something, because I was just expecting comedy from Robert Crumb. I was expecting that kind of artwork, that kind of funny stuff. And it's just an illustration of, it's just an illustrated Bible that he did, which is, like, interesting, because I found it to be like, oh, it's not actually humorous. It's not supposed to be funny, but it's what he wanted to do. I don't know if it was what he wanted to do, or or he was commissioned to do it and they paid him to do it. And he said, sure, you're going to pay me, I'll do it. I don't mind at all, Artists generally will, draw if someone pays them to do it. Like, all the best artists are going to say that some of the reasons why they were drawing certain things that they drew was because they paid him. You know, like Frank Frazetta would say that the only reason he did all that artwork was because they paid him to do it and stuff like that. But I think with Robert Crumb, because he's a real artist. I mean, he would do this whether people paid him or not. But maybe they wouldn't do the Bible unless they paid him, but he would do other things, you know. And it's interesting that, like, he went from underground comics, which was kind of funny and weird and different, and he all of a sudden, and then he went into, you know, just like a serious Bible kind of thing, you know. And I think what's interesting about underground comics is it was underground comics. It's like, we are comics, but we're going to say what we want to say. We're going to do things. We're just going to break the rules just because they're rules, and they shouldn't be there. They're rules of censorship. They're rules of, I'm not going to tolerate this kind of joke, or I'm not going to tolerate if someone says this, and I'm not going to tolerate this subject matter. Now, I understand, like, if someone feels like something is in poor taste, they don't have to read the comics. You know, it's really their opinion. It's like, if someone thinks it's in poor taste, they don't have to read the comics. But they also don't have to say, because I think this is in poor taste, no one can read the comics. You know what I mean? Like, if you think it's in poor taste, don't read the comics. But it's, you know, it's even worse to say, well, I think this is in poor taste. I think this is wrong. I think this is offensive. So you can't do it. So no one can read these comics. These comics shouldn't exist because of my opinion. You know what I mean? So it's interesting because, you know, Robert Crumb says, I have my opinion. You have your opinion, that's fine. But I have my opinion, and I'm going to take that opinion out. Robert Crumb never looked at someone else's work and said, I think, you know, that you shouldn't be allowed to do that. You know what I mean? And underground comics broke the rules just because they were rules. And they weren't rules that were any good. And they were a joke. You know, they weren't even, like, really breaking the rules. And it was fiction. You know, it wasn't really happening. It was just art. It was just drawings. It was just little cartoon characters. You know, how offensive can they possibly be? They're just cartoon characters. And honestly, like, if I'm reading a comic book and I think it's offensive, well, I'm just not going to read it. But I'm not going to, like, burn the book. I'm not going to say, well, this shouldn't exist or no one should read it or anything like that. You know what I mean? And so also, I think at the time was the 60s. So he grew up in the 50s or whatever. I don't know, 40s or 50s, or 50s basically, right? Around that time. And in the 60s is when he got popular with underground comics. In the 60s is when there was a revolution in thinking. And they were coming out of the 50s that was very, very heavy in censorship and conformity. And they were going into this whole hippie era. And, you know, even though he says he didn't like hippies or whatever, he was never a hippie, you know, a lot of his stuff resonated with hippies because it was radical thinking. It wasn't conformist thinking. It wasn't like the same thing you can get anywhere. It wasn't like, this is supposed to be like this, so this is how it is. It wasn't proper. It was new and it was different. And their whole idea was, let's break the rules, because the rules are there to oppress people, basically. You know, yes, there are some rules that are there to make the world a better place, but rules that are unfair, that a lot of people see as unfair, rules that are like censorship, or, you know, like you can't do this, or lack of freedom and stuff. Like, we have a lot more freedom now because of understanding and because of the internet, and because people were allowed to say what they think. And it was because people are allowed to say what they think, and it's okay, that's accepted, that it's okay for people to say what they think, that people that don't know that other people think that can see that that's happening and understand it, and also can find like-minded people. So they don't think that, like, just because they think something different than the majority, that they're the only people thinking that. And with the internet, you can kind of see that, like, no, there are other people that are like-minded. No matter how weird anything is, there's other people that are into that. It doesn't matter how weird it is, other people are into that, you know? And so it was radical. It was different, but it was an expression of freedom. And it was an expression against censorship. And it was an expression, it was an artistic expression at the same time. And so he's just saying, it's not just like what I think and what I'm saying and whatever it is. it's also my art. You know, it's also art, and it's also beautiful, and it's also different than the art world had before. Nobody drew like that. In the history of art, no one drew like that. No one did art that way, as far as I know. You know what I mean? Maybe there was some artwork that he was a little bit inspired by, but his artwork was very original, and he was himself. He was unapologetically himself, you know? And that's important. And I think he's there, and I think he's recognized because he's important. And whether you agree or disagree with his artwork or with his outlook, with his with his sense of humor, it doesn't matter. But being against censorship, being for freedom, being for expression and freedom of expression, and saying, look, I'm drawing pictures. Like, the pictures aren't hurting anybody. Maybe they're offensive, and people are going to be offended by it or whatever, take it the wrong way, or being offended by it if they open and read it. But you know what? They don't have to read it. You know what I mean? It's like someone saying, if you don't like what I say, you don't have to listen, you know, but they have the right to say it, right? You don't like what they say, but they have the right to say it, because it's even worse to say, you have no right to say that, right? You know, and I think that that's the thing. And at the time, it was very, very much of a hippie era. It was very, very much of a revolution in freedom and original thinking and new thinking. And he got into the whole hippie thing, and he got out of the whole hippie thing, and it didn't really stay in that hippie thing, and he actually evolved and started doing like the Bible. I don't know why he did the Bible, but it's okay, like, you know. And I think after that, I mean, he just started doing more of his original work, and then started doing a lot more stuff that wasn't commissioned and wasn't comic books that other people are saying, hey, you know, Robert, you know, draw this and whatever. He started doing his own thing. And I just think that Robert Crumb, he's a real artist. Like, he's an artist. He's always been an artist. He draws all the time. And if you're into art that much, that you're drawing all the time, like, he'll draw on napkins, he'll draw at home, he teaches his son how to draw, and his son draws and stuff like that. You know, he's a real artist. And he's very, very inspiring to other artists, that you can become successful as an artist. You can express your ideas as an artist, and people will accept it. And I think people would, you know, look at his art and say, if someone can accept something as radical and as, you know, like, sort of like edgy and against all of the norms and conformity as R. Crumb's work, then it gives them sort of the belief and confidence that if they just like draw a lot, if they work at it, they can become artists, and they can say what they think, and they can have their own commentary on the world. And I think with Robert Crumb, he doesn't just have his own commentary about life and the world and everything. He's got his own style of expressing it, and his own art style. Just as art, it's his own art style, and it's not a copy of anybody else. It is just totally, as far as I know, totally original. Maybe it's influenced by here and there, or by somebody, but it's totally original. Nobody draws like R. Crumb. You know, nobody draws like Robert Crumb, and I think that's cool, and that's amazing. So let me know what you guys are thinking in the comments. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to be notified when I'm making videos. And yeah, I will see you guys in another video. Take care.